Hello, I'm your host, Les Bubka. Welcome to Anxious Black Belt, a podcast that focuses on karate, mental health, and everything in between. If you enjoy our content and would like to support us, best way to do that is to listen to another episode, share with your friends, and leave us a review. All this stuff helps the mysterious algorithm to introduce our podcast to new audience. Thank you for joining me, and let's listen to the episode. Uh, Warm welcome to Sensei Noah Legel. That's how you pronounce your name, because I
Yep.
always go with a hard G, and I'm thinking, am I pronouncing it correctly or not? But I'm following you for I think nearly a decade now. Are we
Wow.
friends? We friends
Has it been
online,
that
I
long?
think, for that long, but we never actually spoke on a podcast or anything like that, just through messages. Um, so maybe quickly, I'm sure that most of the people who are listening to me know you anyway, but quick run through your martial art story.
Sure. I didn't get started till I was 18 years old, which is, I know, a little bit late for a lot of people. I started in Shuriru Karate, which was it's an American eclectic style of karate. And then I moved to another state and had to train by myself for a while. During that whole time, I was training in judo as well, trained in Okinawan weapons, trained in Japanese swordsmanship. In 2010, I started training with Richard Pogue, who would become my uh, Shorin-ryu sensei, and he passed away in 2017, the end of 2017. Um, I also have been training under Ulf Carlson Shihan in Kishimoto-di since 2014. And then last year, myself and a few other like-minded martial artists got together and created the International Neoclassical Karate Kobudo Society, which is a non-profit organization that aims to essentially help spread neoclassical or practical or pragmatic approaches to karate, essentially trying to bring karate back to its roots as an effective fighting system for self-defense, law enforcement, security work, while being willing to actually incorporate modern methods as well. And that's the quick rundown, we can say.
Yes, I had a few questions from our common friend. So Brian Bates was actually just when I was thinking to invite you, he was saying, "Oh, why don't speak to Noah? It would be interesting." So I said, "Well, give me a questions," and they actually align with my questions as well. So we've been focusing your projects with Sensei Pogue. That's how you pronounce.
Yes, Richard Pogue.
You got such a difficult. I thought the Polish surnames are difficult.
Well, his is Irish. My last name is actually German and it's missing a letter.
Oh,
That
okay.
that's where it comes from. When my ancestors came to America, there wasn't an O umlaut on the typewriter,
All right.
and whereas most families kept an O, ours just dropped it entirely. So we
Oh,
lost
okay.
the O umlaut and became legal.
Yeah, so I've been following you and your Waza Wednesday and stuff you've been doing with Sensei. A very tragic story. I remember you posting about it, and we all been kind of going through it, and had a huge compassion, and it was something that I think touched everybody because he was so outgoing, and although I never met him, he had that aura of kindness around him. So if you could kind of shed a bit of a light how you kind of met up together and what was like to train with him and what impact he had on your not only karate but kind of your whole life, because I think he was very impactful on your journey.
Um, I found him initially, basically by chance, the way most people find an
Hmm.
instructor. I had done a search on the internet because uh, I had that period of time for about 2 years when I moved to Arizona, where I had a work schedule that kept me working very late. There were no karate schools with a class late enough for me to attend. And then when I finally, after 2 years, got a new schedule that would allow me to attend, I started looking for karate class. But during those 2 years, I'd been doing a lot of research into karate, and that had kind of shifted my focus, so to speak, because originally I had been very much a kata collector. I wanted to learn as many kata as I could possibly learn. I loved doing, formal drills and stuff just for the sake of doing them. It wasn't about the practicality. But after I became essentially responsible for my own training because I didn't have an instructor anymore, I had the opportunity to sort of reevaluate what I wanted out of martial arts. And the research that I did led me to people like Ian Abernethy and Vince Morris and the practical side of karate. And so I determined that I wanted to do that. I wanted more practical material. And I wanted something that was somewhat similar to what I'd already done, so that
Mhm.
transition would be a little easier. So I figured I'll look for Shorin-ryu. That's related. And I found two Shorin-ryu dojos in Phoenix that looked like good options, and his happened to be the first one I went to. I did actually eventually go and visit the other one, which was run by a ninth dan from Okinawa named Jiro Shiroma. Great guy, super fun to train with, but I really connected with my sensei,
Mm.
Richard Pogue. I initially went and I watched a class, and I remember it was an advanced class for his brown and black belt, and it was a very small class because there had been an advanced test that weekend,
Mhm.
and it was I think a Monday or Tuesday, and they had not recovered yet from their test. So there were only maybe 3 people in that class. But I watched the class, and they did kata, and it was some of it similar, some of it different. But then he would go into showing applications for these things, and it wasn't the children's version, the block punch kick that I was used to. And uh, after that, we sat and talked for, I don't know, an hour and a half, 2 hours after that class was over, just about what I was looking for and, what I wanted to get out of martial arts training. I found out that we actually shared experience in Shuri-ryu. He had Shuri-ryu experience before he came to Shorin-ryu. So he knew what that transition was going to be like, essentially. Um, and he was really big on practicality, on making your karate work, on understanding how to use the kata, not just how to do them. And he made me feel very welcome. And I came to the next advanced class. He told me to come to the advanced class. I was a brown belt in Shuri-ryu at the time.
Mhm.
So he had me come to the advanced class. It turned out that nobody else besides one of the other instructors came to that class. So it was me, a fifth dan at the time, and my sensei. At the time, my sensei was a fourth dan. And that was something that I found really interesting as well, is that over the course of time that I knew him, there were several people of higher rank that came to train with him,
Mm.
regardless of the fact that he was a lower rank than they were. Um, and it never went to his head. He never got, you know, braggadocious about it or anything like that. Um, there was always a mentality in his dojo of you can learn something from everyone, and he wanted his students to come up with their own ways of doing things and share that and have everyone benefit, that kind of thing. Um, and it was just very much a kind of brotherly relationship that we ended up having. A
Mm.
lot of people have sort of a parent-child relationship with their sensei, and I think a lot of that often is because of the age difference that usually happens with that. But because I started so late, and my sensei was still so young, by the time uh, we met, he'd been training since he was 4. I'd
Mhm.
only been training since I was 18, but he was only 3 years older than me. So it was very much like having an older brother. Um, we could joke with each other, we could make fun of each other, and still, be serious when it was time to be serious, train hard, and um, really push each other to grow, which I think is sort of a unique situation for a lot of people when it comes to that
Mm,
relationship with their sensei. And he definitely uh, encouraged me to explore karate beyond what he was actually teaching.
mm,
And it wasn't just, okay, I'm going to teach you all these things, you memorize all these things, and that's what you're going to do. It was, if you can think of something that is going to work better for you or that's just different and interesting, show it to me. Let's try it out. Um, and that really left a mark on my karate and really set me on a good path, I think, from that perspective.
I see that this is one of the kind of very common things among the people who kind of evolve and start doing their own stuff, that they've got that teacher who allows them to venture and get experiences and put everything together to create your own style of karate. I know it's gonna be a sensitive topic, but it's you not becoming a carbon copy of your teacher, but you are your own expression of karate.
Absolutely. Um, he he liked to actually reference something that he was told by a man named Doug Perry, who is himself a ninth dan promoted from Okinawa, although he's an American. And he would say that your karate shouldn't look like your instructor's karate,
Mm.
and theirs shouldn't look like their instructor's karate, because everyone's karate should be personal. You should make it your own. Uh, and my sensei really took that to heart. And absolutely, if there were opportunities to cross train, uh, if he couldn't make it to a seminar, he would be happy to send you to a seminar, and he'd say, yeah, bring back whatever is interesting and help everybody in the dojo in that way.
But Sensei Richard's journey as well was through the several different styles. I think I remember talking with you. He was the first done in Taika Oyata's Ryute,
Yeah.
wasn't he as well? So it was
Mhm.
Shuri, Shorin Ryu, Taika's. I like Taika's stuff. I've got the friends who are quite high now in offshots of the organization. Actually, I was catching up with him last weekend, and he really enjoys the Kobudo now, which I don't. But
Yeah.
yeah, so he was kind of picking up stuff what works for him, right?
Yeah. So when he started, uh, he actually got started in kickboxing
Mm.
at the age of 4 under a world champion kickboxer whose name I'm forgetting right now. But he started in kickboxing and then progressed into Shuri-Ryu, and then progressed into he did shoot fighting actually at
Wow.
uh, at Dan Severn's gym, the early MMA fighter Dan Severn, and then he progressed into Ryukyu Kempo. I don't actually remember if Ryute had been trademarked yet at that point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but so I think it might have still been Ryukyu Kempo when he did it. But he actually became the youngest person Taiko Yata ever promoted
Oh, wow.
um, to Shodan. He was 16 years old when Taika promoted him to black belt.
This is
Um,
impressive.
yeah, he's definitely impressive, and he would always be the first to tell you he has no talent whatsoever. It's all just having to put in the work. And you don't believe him while he's on the mats, and then he steps off the mat, and the moment he's off, he trips on something, and you're like, okay, no, it makes a little more sense now. But yeah, after that, he got into Shorin-ryu. He had an instructor who did a little bit of organization hopping. So he was Shorin-kan, then he was Reihokan, and then he came back to Shorinkan. Those are related schools, but different organizations, and ended up deciding that he wanted to train under Eddie Bethea, who's one of the big names in that organization, the Shorinkan in the United States, uh, who teaches a lot of kata bunkai actually in his seminars,
Hmm.
and that was why, well, that and just generally being impressed with his karate. That was why my sensei wanted to train with him, and that's where he was when I met him. Uh, and despite that, though, all of that experience that he had in all those other systems really did make him move differently.
Hmm.
Um, it was kind of funny to go to the organization's big training camp where you're going to have 200, 300 people all in a room, all doing the same kata and drills and such. But you can look out over that room full of people and say, oh, those are Richard. Because we definitely moved different than
Hmm.
the rest of the organization, which was really interesting. People could always pick us out of a crowd.
So on your journey, you uh, been testing stuff. So you had it was a cage rage fight, MMA fight.
Um, yeah, I was an MMA fight at an organization called Rage in the Cage. Uh, I was still a brown belt when I did that. I hadn't gotten my Shodan yet, and I had been a fan of MMA for quite some time, and I had decided that the best competition rule set for um, pressure testing old style karate is MMA because it's the most
Mhm.
open rule set. It isn't the most focused on old school karate because that would be something where you're forced to stay at close range, right?
Mhm.
Because that's essentially the context for the kata. And MMA has the long range component as well. But even so, I had started in a sport karate type environment, so I had a background in that. And although my sensei was big on the kata application and the self-defense side of things, he really also enjoyed sport fighting. So we did all
Mhm.
kinds of different sparring, including MMA style sparring. So uh, we set ourselves up for a fight. Well, I set myself up for a fight, and then my sensei had to get a coaching license, but uh, for that specifically. Um, and I actually ended up having a bunch of opponent changes and things like that. Amateur MMA in the United States is a very poorly regulated and poorly run um, system. So there's an awful lot of the organization trying to like bump up the record of their golden child, and so they'll
All
try
right,
and
yeah.
put somebody with 8 fights against somebody with no fight because they want the 8 fight win streak guy to go 9 fights in a row, that kind of
Mm.
thing. They mix up uh, people's uh, weight classes, stuff like that. There was actually one of the opponents they tried to put me against was a guy who owns a gym and trains full time and and had fought like 12 times. I'm like,
Mm.
I don't think that's appropriate for my
Mm.
first fight. So I was supposed to fight somebody who would also be making their first, MMA fight debut, but then he got sick or somebody got sick. They shuffled it around, and I ended up with about 2 weeks' notice assigned to fight a state champion wrestler with 3 fights, all of which he finished in the first round. And I said, you know what? Fine. Sure. So my opponent, I did find footage of 2 of his 3 fights, uh, one of which he finished by a shoulder lock,
Mhm.
and one he finished by knockout. And I knew from his record he finished the other fight by knockout, all in the first round. Um, and I noticed, though, that he had a single go-to move, and that was a knee pick with an overhand right,
Mhm.
which is essentially Yamazuki, right?
Yeah, yeah.
As one of the applications for that technique, which works well, but it also leaves a giant window for you to be hit through. And so my sensei and I decided, okay, we're going to capitalize on that. We worked a lot on takedown defense leading up to my fight, about, like I said, about the 2 weeks that I knew I was going to fight this guy. We did a lot of takedown defense, but we also worked a lot of lead leg kicks. because
Hmm.
I tend to fight right side forward. Fought left side forward, and that meant that the opening for the kick was on my lead side. So we did a lot of lead leg kicks. Um, I can say that the adrenaline of going into that fight, it was a packed, essentially like theater,
Hmm.
balcony seats and floor seats and everything, all filled up. It was being televised and streamed on the internet, and the adrenaline of that really gave me tunnel vision, which made
Mm.
things a little difficult for sure. It didn't help that when they were announcing my opponent and myself, they announced that he was making his pro debut in that fight, while I was making my amateur debut, which they didn't mention.
Hmm.
And the rules for pro and amateur MMA are different.
All right.
So then I didn't know what the rules were. Uh,
That's difficult.
spe- yeah, specifically, you can't knee the head or
Hmm.
throw any elbows in amateur MMA in Arizona at the time. But as a pro, you could knee the head, knee the body, and you could elbow the body. Couldn't elbow the head. But even so, I'm like, okay, can I do knees or can I not do knees? Can I elbow the body or can I not elbow the body? I don't know. So that got to me as well. And the tunnel vision just got even worse. And what happened was he looked really far away. Uh, so he popped me with a jab very early on that I just didn't think he could reach me with,
Hmm.
which actually I bit my lip. That was the worst injury that I incurred over the course of this fight. Was I bit my lip because I wasn't ready. Um, I chased him a little bit. I could have actually followed him and hit him, and I should have. But again, he looked too far away, and I didn't think
Mm.
I could reach him until I saw the footage later. He ended up getting that takedown in the first round, so I played defense on the ground. I did a lot of rolling with the punches. Literally, he'd throw punches and I'd move, which looks terrible on video as well. It looks like he's bouncing my head around, but
Hmm.
I'm the one moving my head, which the ref could tell. He told me after the fact. He's like, I realize it looked bad, but you looked like you know, you were all there.
Knowing
You
what
were
you're
doing
doing,
what you
yeah,
needed
yeah.
to do. Yeah. And actually, to the point, I had no black eyes. I had no bloody noses. I had no bruises at all. What I had on my face were burns after the fight,
All right.
friction
Mm-hmm.
burns of his gloves sliding off. But uh, yeah, when the clapper for 10 seconds left of the round went off, I decided, all right, enough playing on the ground because he slammed me several times. He outweighed me by a
Hmm.
good bit. He didn't make weight for that fight. I weighed in 171 pounds. I made weight for welterweight, and he did not. He
All
came
right.
in he came in like 11 pounds over, and even then, I think you know, was actually heavier than that. But yeah, he picked me up and slammed me several times while I was trying to put arm bars on him, that kind of thing. So 10 seconds left. All right, I'm going to try and get up, and I at least got to my knees. That way, I didn't finish my round on my back because I know that's not good in MMA scoring. Um, between rounds, wash the blood out of my mouth from biting my lip. My sensei's there telling me, okay, when you're going for the arm bar, switch this way so that he can't defend it as easily, that sort of thing. And I just tell him, I'm just going to kick him now. So I go into the second round and I'm just like, okay, I know what I'm going to do because he's going to try that takedown again. It's his go-to takedown and it worked in the first round. So I'm going to watch his shoulder. And the moment he dips that shoulder, I'm kicking him in the head.
Mm.
And that happened 11 seconds into the second round. He started to
Cool.
shoot for that takedown. I kicked him in the head. Uh, and that was the end of that. Um, and I did feel a little bad because they had to put him on oxygen and strap him to a spine board and all that.
Mm.
That was the only person who had to get taken out of the cage that way that night. But he was also a jerk the whole time leading up to the fight. So
Mm.
there was a little bit of, I would feel worse if you were a nice guy. But he ended up being okay. But the funny thing was that two things happened. One, there was a debate over the legality of my kick because from
Well,
certain angles it looked like my knee hit him in the head.
okay.
And remember, amateur, I can't knee
Mm.
people in the head. So they had to figure out what I actually hit him with. Was it my
Mm.
knee or was it my shin? What did I hit him with? And when they found an angle that satisfied them that I kicked him, not kneed
Mhm.
him. So that was pretty funny. But then I got my little post-fight interview in the cage um, by a former fighter who clearly doesn't know anything about karate besides what Lyoto Machida does. You could tell that from his fight commentary when I went back and watched the recording later. But
Mhm.
it was very evident in his tone of voice and the way that he asked me about the kick that he thought it was a lucky kick.
Mhm.
And I was like, I intended to do that earlier, but Nerf got the better of me. Um, but it was kind of funny too to see how many people uh, who supported and were fans of that guy or were his friends told him that it was a lucky kick. So then he got knocked out in his next fight also,
All right.
rather than fixing an issue. But
Mm.
uh, yeah, it was a really good test of my karate, even though I didn't get to use much of my karate in the process,
Mhm.
because it was a test of me as a martial artist, right? I wanted to fight again, but shortly thereafter, some genetic health issues started to crop up for me, which have only gotten worse as I've gotten older. So that's made it
Mm.
so I can't get medical clearance to fight full contact anymore anyway. So I only got to do the one MMA fight, but it was still a really valuable test. And it's something that I would encourage people to try at least once if
Mhm.
you are serious about your karate and being effective. I think it's really good to have some degree of full contact competitive experience because it really puts you under a lot of pressure in a way that regular sparring doesn't.
Yeah,
Uh,
I fully agree with you. And if you never stepped up on the mat, ring, cage, where somebody actually wants to take your head off, you don't know what fear is. I know it's not the same as a street, but I think safely this is the closest thing we can get to natural. And like you said, tunnel vision, the time is warping. It's all taking so slow, and it looks slow on the outside, but it's super fast for you. And
yeah,
and like you said, distance disturbances and stuff like that. So I always say to my students, at least once you need to step up and have a look how it feels, and just get used to it.
yeah, absolutely.
Speaking about the competition, that's another question from Brian. Um, you are planning, or have you done it already? Kakademishi, is I saying that properly?
Takademeshi.
Kakademishi competition. Can you shed light on this idea?
Um, yeah, so we haven't done it yet, but it's something that I have had in the works and I've done a little bit of workshopping with other folks. And it's something that I would like to put together is competition kakedameshi. Of course, the issue is that most people aren't familiar with kakedameshi in the first place. And so,
Mhm.
of course, it's a little difficult to get people on board with a new competition format that they've not heard of potentially. But at the same time, whether we like it or not as traditional martial artists, we have to recognize that the way that martial art spread the fastest is through competition.
Mhm.
The way that it grows is by competition, whether we like it or not. Karate tournaments in the US, for example, are the reason karate is so prevalent in the United
Mhm.
States. And so it's important if you have something in your martial art that you want to promote and preserve, you need to find a way to get it into a competition. And like I said earlier when we started the conversation about the MMA fight, MMA is the most open rule set for combat sports right now. So you can do essentially any martial art and go into MMA and see how it does, including karate from a practical perspective focused on the kata. You just need that long range and the groundwork.
Mhm.
But if we want to focus just on the old school karate methods that are in the kata, then you need a fighting method that forces you to be at close range because that's really ideal for that type of material.
Mhm.
And kakedemeshi does that. So, for those who are unfamiliar with kakedemeshi, it's been written about by Funakoshi Gichin, the founder of Shotokan, by Nagamine Shoshin, the founder of Matsubayashi Ryu, by Motobu Choki and several of his students. For a long time, people misunderstood what kakedemeshi was, and they thought that it was going out and getting into street fights,
Mhm.
um, which is not what it meant or what it was. It was a method of challenge fighting other martial artists. And essentially, how it works is you cross arms, you either cross one arm or both arms, and you try to remain in contact with each other while striking, joint locking, doing takedowns, trying to strangle people, that sort of thing. Nagamine Shoshin described it as being very much like Chinese push hands competition,
Mhm.
but very aggressive and incorporating, in addition to takedowns, strikes and joint locks and strangles and such. And so it's essentially mixed martial arts where you have to stay at
Close.
close range touching. It's
Mm.
very similar to clinch sparring in Muay Thai, just a little more open on what you can do.
Mhm.
And this is something that I've been trying to get more people involved in. So I've written an article about it that was published in Bugeisha magazine. I've written about it on my own website. I have done a number of videos just sort of explaining what it is, and I've also taught several seminars on kakedemeshi. And I would like to get enough people practicing it and doing it that if we get it into a competition, people will be able to see it done by at least, a dozen or so people at a
Mm.
tournament and decide, okay, I want to go that route. I want to see what that's about. And just by doing it, they will be making their karate more in line with its original intentions because that's forcing you to fight in a certain context.
Mm.
And that's where you're going to start seeing your kata applications, even if you haven't learned them as kata applications. I'm very aware that when you set up a competition rule set, there's going to be people who train just for that rule set
Mm.
and nothing else. And so I know that those people may not all do kata. They may drop kata entirely in favor of just training the fighting techniques for this competition format. It's just going to so happen that the majority of what they find that work is going to be in the kata also.
Mm. Yeah,
And
it's
they can tie it back later if nothing else.
yeah, it's always that kind of mentality of winning in a current rule set that drives people to just focus obsessively about this and lose the longer pictures. We see that happening in Kyokushin, we see that happening in Shotokan as well, and point fighting, which is very popular in States, isn't it? Uh,
Yeah.
so tying that in with your progression again now, what is so special about Kishimoto D, isn't it?
Kishimoto D. Okay. So Kishimoto D is another obscure topic. For a lot of
Mm, mm,
people, that name won't be familiar. It's never going to come up in that list of what style should you do or
mm,
whatever the case may be because it is so small. It's a very rare system. Kishimoto-di wasn't actually even named Kishimoto-di officially until 2011 because
wow.
the Bugekan, where it's taught, just called it Kishimoto's material.
Mhm,
It because it came from an era where it things like that you didn't have style names. It was just, oh yeah, it's that guy's T or Todi. It's that guy's
mm,
martial art. Um, it wasn't a style. And what ended up happening was enough people at the Bugekan were worried about it dying out that they convinced the head of the Bugekan to register the style with a name officially with the Japanese government. And that way it would be a little easier to promote and uh, preserve it, keep it from
Mm.
dying out. But Kishimoto-di is a shurite system, so it's related to Shorin-ryu systems,
Mhm.
modern-day Shorin-ryu. But it didn't go through Itosu Anko, the man who modernized karate and introduced it to the Okinawan school system.
Or
The
as so-
same
or
man,
a- or as some say, ruined it.
some say ruined it. I would say that he started the process. I don't think he ruined it himself, but he definitely set karate on a certain path
Mm.
that while it did result eventually in a lot of people doing karate that
Yeah, yeah.
probably wouldn't have otherwise, it had some downsides for sure. But it is interesting to see a shurite system that isn't impacted by itosu. And we can also see that to some degree in Matsumura Seito Shorinryu, which
Mhm.
um, it is a little bit hazy on the validity of their history for a number of reasons. I'm not a Matsumura Seito historian, so I'm not going to get into the details of that, but it's a little iffy on where things come from and so on. Um, but those are really the only two Shurite systems that didn't go through Itosu. And from what I understand, Hohan Soken, the founder of Matsumura Seito,
Mhm.
did pick up material from Chibana Chosen when he went back to Okinawa, and possibly Hanashiro Chomo. So he got Itosu influence when he came back from South America to Okinawa. But Kishimoto, as far as we know, didn't have that influence. And it certainly doesn't appear to have had that influence if you compare it to all the other Shurite systems that exist today.
Yeah,
So,
the kata looks very different. And I have to
yeah,
say, I think I was consulting with you because I'm running that group for my elderly. So I use kind of loosely based Naihanchi on Kishimoto D because I think that the open stances are much better and the squatting is much better for elderly. Plus, crossing the legs is good for their balance and motor skills. So I'm using in that way, but I have no
yeah.
idea about Kishimoto D. But I like the way uh, Sensei Ulf and you move within Naihanchi structure.
Yeah, it's definitely different from modern Naihanchi kata or Teki kata.
Mm.
Um, for those who haven't seen it, it is performed in shikodachi, your horse stance, as opposed to a kibidachi that a lot of modern Japanese styles do, where your toes are forward but your knees
Mm.
are bent out, or the Naihanchi dachi, where your toes are pointed inward, that's used in Shorin systems. And as Les mentions, you sink and rise in that stance. You squat throughout the kata.
Mm.
So you don't maintain a single head height like a lot of modern systems. You twist at the waist, which is very different. People are used to using their hips, and there's
Mhm.
no hip work in Kishimoto-di because Kishimoto-di generates power by twisting at the waist, sinking and rising in your stance, shifting into your stance, and stepping into your stance.
Mm.
So there's no explicit hip rotation, which is a more modern idea, I think. But we can see that this stance work was probably the way that Naihanchi was originally done. There's examples of students of Kensu Yabu, one of Ito's students, doing Naihanchi in Shikodachi. If you look at the early books that Funakoshi wrote before his son went back and re-edited them that later on, you can actually see that Naihanchi Shodan, he does in a very high Kibadachi,
Mhm.
but Naihanchi Nidan and Sandan, he does in Shikodachi.
Mhm.
And then there's one video I've seen of him when he is elderly, where he runs Teki Shodan, right? But in Shikodachi.
Mhm.
So, and I think to your point, it's absolutely easier on older people to use Shikodachi. And I think that it is easier to uh, essentially get them moving that way because it's easier to squat, which is
Mhm.
helpful for building strength and endurance and health overall, right? The sinking and rising aspect being squats. Um, and Ulf even mentions that it is much easier on the body as a martial art than a lot of modern systems.
Yeah, definitely. I'm coming from kind of Kyokushin-based system, so we've got more of a kibadachi, and I always hated it. It's completely not for my knees, not my for ankles. I'm naturally going into, even if I try to do proper kibadachi, my feet are kind of awkwardly sticking out, which I was always, no, that's not properly, do it better. And but I switch every kibadachi now I'm doing in shikodachi. It's just so much healthier for me.
I think that's true for most people. I have a joint hypermobility disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So my joints are more flexible than they should be, to the point of actually they can dislocate very easily.
Hmm.
But one of the benefits of that for me was I was able to do Kibadachi the way we were told to do it. So
Hmm.
in Shuriru, mentioning that it's an American eclectic style, its basics are very much Shotokan
Shotokan, yeah.
basics. And we did Naihanchi in Kibadachi, and it was a very wide, low Kibadachi. And I had the flexibility to do that. But it wasn't good for my joints either.
Mm.
My ankles and knees were always in pain trying to do that. And then I moved on to Shorinryu and discovered Kibadachi doesn't exist in Shorinryu. And I was like, that's a good idea. I'm gonna go with that.
Mm.
Um, so even there for a while at the beginning, I was still practicing my Shuriru kata, but I dropped all the Kibadachi and did
Mm.
Shikodachi instead. But yeah, there's also no such thing as Kibadachi in Kishimoto-di. It does Naihanchi in that Shikodachi, and it's a very soft uh, style in general. There's not the hard kime. There's not a lot of jarring motions with the joints. You're not whipping in the same way. And so it looks very soft. It looks very Chinese in a way, like Chinese
Mm.
martial arts. Um, and that is one of the things that I get a lot when I post videos of it is people will comment on how it looks more like Kung Fu, or how it looks lazy and I need to add snap. One of the
Yeah.
one of the two. But I actually just recently taught a webinar on Tachimura no Naihanchi, which went really well. We went through the kata itself and a bunch of applications. It's especially interesting to me because not only do we have the solo kata that was passed down through a lineage of Shurite separate from Itosu, but it was passed down with applications.
Mm.
Um, at least as far back as Kishimoto Soko, which gets us pre 1900. Uh, it's hard to say for sure if he passed along everything he knew and so on, but at least as far as we know, all the applications that we are doing for Kishimoto-di came from Kishimoto Soko, um, who was taught by Bushi Tachimura. He isn't really well known at all, but he was a contemporary of Bushi Matsumura, right? The
Mm-hmm.
famous Bushi Matsumura. Uh, he was actually a little older than Matsumura, if I remember correctly, but they both trained under Todi Sakagawa, so they share a lineage in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so it's really interesting to get to see kata being done in a more Chinese way and have applications for them that very specifically fit the kata. And by that, I mean the mechanics you use in the kata are required to do the techniques correctly, do the
Mm-hmm.
applications correctly. Right? If you don't think and rise in the kata, the application doesn't fit anymore because the application uses the thinking and rising to
Mm-hmm.
generate power. Like I mentioned before, the thinking and rising, the twisting, shifting in your stances, all these things for power generation, that ties into how you apply it, which uh, just unlocked a lot of things for me with regard to my Shorinryu as well, because all of these things help inform my Shorinryu practice now because it's sort of an ancestor to Shorinryu.
Mm. So I jump in with a question. So because I was thinking just I need to ask him, I need to ask him how much changes it took you to transition. But what it looks like, it's that it's just built on and unlock the stuff within. So it's not much of a struggle with, some people going through a completely different systems. Oh, I have to learn forget what I learned and not learn new stuff. It sounds like for you, it just went, okay, I put this one on, and that's a key to unlock everything which I done before.
It's a little of both.
Mm,
Because early on, when you've got to remember the pattern of the kata, right? When you're first
mm,
learning the kata, you do have to try to forget, at least temporarily, the other kata you do, if you already do them, right? I already did a
mm,
Naihanchi, a Pasai, and a Kusanku. So then I'm learning a new version of Naihanchi, Pasai, and Kusanku. They have enough similarities that it's easy to mix them up at first. So early on, you do have to dedicate a little more effort to
mm,
put aside what you have already learned so that you can learn the new way of doing things. Um, Once you're comfortable with it, though, it's not so much an issue. So now I can switch back and forth and not mix them up because now they are, uh, internalized well enough for me that I naturally am able to shift focus because they are mechanically different, right? Shorin-ryu uses the hip. Shorin-ryu does a lot of different stances that aren't in Kishimoto-di.
mm,
It uses techniques that are different in shape or different in movement pattern. And it's easy to slip between the two if you're not that familiar with one or the other. So it took a little bit at first for me to get to where Ulf would say that I'm not Shorin-ruing my Kishimoto-di quite so much. Uh, but the thing is, even while you're going through that process, it's still unlocking the Shorin-ryu side of things. So yes, you have to temporarily forget that stuff so you can learn the new stuff, but only during the training session, right? It's not like you forget it for real.
mm,
So that by the time you finish your Kishimoto-di training session, you're going, man, that connects back to the way that we did this in this kata in Shorin-ryu, and that reminds me of this thing that this Okinawan master wrote back in 1928 or whatever. And it unlocks things even as you're having to keep them separate initially.
mm,
And I do try to keep them largely separate so that Kishimoto-di can be preserved without too much influence from my Shorin-ryu. But every now and then, I'll teach something and go, okay, that was a blend. That was me bringing my Shorin-ryu into my
mm,
Kishimoto-di and informing it. And sometimes that makes it a little more complex. Uh, Kishimoto-di, Ulf Carlson likes to say that Kishimoto-di is so simple it's difficult.
mhm.
When,
Usually things are.
yeah,
Is how just lost my thought, but is the I know what I want to say because you are kind of into history, you're geeking out on in karate history. Is there many more systems like Kishimoto the being out there, but they don't have a spectacular promotion and advertisement, and they don't selling themselves? Do you think there's many of that kind of a brilliant systems that are under the radar?
I'm sure there are more than we realize, right, that are being taught by effectively just some guy who knows a thing, and he's teaching it out of his house somewhere on Okinawa. I'm sure that's true. Um, the the most well-known sort of earth-shattering revelation in karate was Ryukyu Kempo from Taiko Yata,
Mm-hmm.
but of course that blew up and people know about it. But on the smaller scale, there are people on Okinawa doing what they call tomarite.
Mm-hmm.
Yamashiro Yoshitomo is one of them. Um, he's put out several DVDs now on Naihanchi, Pinan, and Seisan
Mm-hmm.
application. And his tomarite is, as I recall, actually related to Oyata's Ryukyu Kempo in a way. And I've seen a lot of what he does that's similar to Kishimoto-di, but quite a bit that's different too. And I think it's really interesting. There's also various people who are doing Matsumura Seito in various places. It's a bigger name, of course.
Mm-hmm.
but I think there are a lot of smaller dojo that you probably wouldn't hear about that are probably better off than most of the big names you'll hear. Uh, and then you have Onaga Yoshimitsu, I think is his given name, who developed his own take on tea or
Mm-hmm.
te, um, which people are just calling Onaga tea now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's the Shinjinbukan organization on Okinawa. They are well known for their makiwara work
Mm-hmm.
because famously, there is a video that just has gone viral time and time again of his daughter working the makiwara. So if you've seen
Oh
a
yeah,
young Japanese
seen.
woman in the
Yeah, yeah.
short sleeved gi destroying this makiwara, that's his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that a lot of what they do is really interesting. One of his students from Denmark, Jan Dam Sensei, actually just passed away. Uh, and I got to see a lot of really interesting in-depth material from him as
Mm-hmm.
well. I think that's one that more people should be aware of. Uh, but yeah, I'm sure there are even more than that. These are people who've at least had some uh, aspect of spotlight brought to them over the years, right? But I'm betting that if you found yourself in the right yakitori restaurant at the right time of day on Okinawa, you'd run into somebody who has been teaching this martial art from their family for the last 50 years, but they've only got three students,
Yeah.
and it might be fantastic. The only other one that I could really say, I suppose two, there's Toan Ryu,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is sort of an ancestor to Goju,
Mm-hmm.
but very few people practice it. Uh, but at least more people have heard about it. And then Doug Perry Sensei that I mentioned earlier, in addition to being ninth dan in Shorinryu, when he was stationed on Okinawa, because he was a Marine during Vietnam, he was stationed on Okinawa. Uh, he met a man from the Takamiyoshi family, and as I recall, he got that man's uncle a job on the base
Mm-hmm.
because his uncle was disabled. He was missing an arm, I think. And but so he was having a hard time finding work. So he got him a job on the military base as a groundskeeper. And in return, he got to train with that family in their style of karate.
Oh, cool.
Uh, to the best of my knowledge, they haven't taught anybody else outside the system. I've never heard of the Takamayoshi family from anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know if they're still teaching even, but he teaches a Nuntibo kata that he got from them. Uh, and I believe he also learned a version of Seiyunshin from them and a kata called Rokishu
Mm-hmm.
and a kata called Hakusuru, the infamous white crane kata.
Mm.
Uh, and I believe he got all those from the Takamiyoshi family. And I did learn all of those at one point. The Seiyunshin was so close to the Goju version that they were effectively the same.
Mm-hmm.
Minor differences here and there. So the version that I do now is just sort of a tweaked version anyway. But I admittedly I have forgotten the other kata. The Nuntibo kata is difficult, and I'm
Mm.
not that into Kobudo anymore, so it just sort of fell out of practice. The Rokushu kata, I could pick it back up from looking back at my video references if I wanted to, but it's very simple. Um, it People will say that it's related to Tensho,
Mm-hmm.
but it really isn't. Um, they they are very distinctly different kata, so I think it's a coincidence because there is literature out there that says Rokishu is the old name of Tensho,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that this happens to be a coincidence of names. I don't think it's the same Rokishu that is an ancestor of Tensho.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hakusu kata is just very, very long and difficult. It takes over 3 minutes to perform that kata.
Mm.
So it's
Wow.
very long.
How do you think the Motobu Udundi, um, fits within karate because that's kind of older siblings of Motobu preserving their traditional system, and Motobu just went and do I do my shit.
Yeah, Motobu Udundi would be the other, uh, you know, old version of karate that's practiced on Okinawa, and I should have mentioned that in my list, but
Mm.
it escaped me, even though that's one of the things that's taught at the Bugeikan along with
Yeah,
Kishimoto-di.
yeah, yeah.
But Motobu Udundi to me has a bit of a different focus because it is it's the palace hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what Udundi means is palace hand. It's the martial arts of the royal family, and the royal family didn't really have to use their martial arts because they had people like Matsumura to do
Yeah.
martial arts for them, right? And Bushi Matsumura famously said he didn't like the martial arts of the royal family because it was too flowery.
Mm. You can
And
see that
so,
when you watch how the Udundi moves, it is very dance like.
yeah, and they use dances in place of kata,
Mhm.
really. They don't really teach kata in the same way we think of it. They teach dances, complete with music. Um, and they teach weapons as well, which is interesting that their weapons practice and their unarmed practice go hand in hand. They're not separate practices. And there is a lot of good material in there. There's a very significant amount of tuidi waza, seizing hand
Mhm.
techniques, joint locks and such. But the way that they approach it is much more academic and performative, in my opinion. Um, so there's a lot of different ways that you can practice your martial arts, right?
Mhm.
Same with Tweety. You can practice it for destruction. You can practice it for controlling people. You can practice it for the study of the human body. And I think it's more about the study of the human body for them, um, somewhat like Aikido in a way, right?
Mhm.
They're learning how you can manipulate a person, right? All these different ways that you can lock up somebody's joints and make them move by pain or by just physically locking them up in a position where they have to move a certain way. And I think that it could be made practical just by taking those techniques and putting them into a situation where you're dealing with realistic attacks, and
Mhm.
then you start incorporating resistance. I don't think it's that the techniques are bad necessarily, but I think that it is a little removed from practicality because that's not really the emphasis, right? It's more of an art form and less of a martial practice at this point because they, again, didn't have need of using it really for a very long time. Um, I do think Motobu Choki probably learned more of it than he gets credit for
Mhm.
because, yes, he wasn't the oldest son, so his brother Choyu was the one officially getting to learn it. But
He must have talked to his brothers and do stuff, didn't he?
if my brothers were, yeah, if I were trying to keep something secret from my brothers, there's no way I could keep it secret from my brothers. They're going to sneak around and spy and find ways
Mm.
to figure out what I'm doing. So I'm sure Motobuchoki, at the very least, spied on his brother's training and got to see some of it. But we also know that Motobuchoki, despite knowing about his family's martial arts and probably having seen it and having some understanding of it, still decided to go a different route. And he was a
Mm.
very practically minded practitioner, which I think just sort of falls in line again with Matsumura's statement about it being too flowery. If you're more interested in the practical side of things, you may want to go a different route. But that's not to say that the material in it can't inform your karate as well, right? There's a
Mhm.
lot of things I've seen in Motobu Udundi demonstrations that tie back into, okay, well, I can see how that is related to this movement from this kata or this posture that I've
Mm.
seen or this version of that joint lock. And it can give you another way to look at what you do.
Mm. For sure. Uh, so recently it's coming more uh, popular view, I think. I'm not sure how it's supported by a historical studies that in Okinawa most of the people in education had the wrestling, so the tegumi
Yes.
or stuff. How do you think that tie in? Is the possibility that because the karate moved to Japan and people maybe not had the wrestling, that's the reason why we lost the grappling applications for kata. Because I'm fairly believe done wrestling before, seeing kata, and it's just full of wrestling. And
Yeah,
assumption might have been that, we're showing you those moves because you know wrestling, you know instantly what we're doing, right? But I don't know
yeah.
how much it is kind of evidence for that. It's kind of guesswork
Well,
here.
we know for a fact that Tegumi or Muto was a very, very common pastime for the young men of Okinawa. This was written about by several different masters, Funakoshi, Nagamine, Mabuni. Several different people have mentioned this, that this was just a pretty much standard after school activity. Was they'd get together, they'd scrape a clearing in the ground, and they'd start grappling with each other. And those people also have given us several different accounts that essentially describe what Tegumi was. And Tegumi was a no-gi submission grappling folk style wrestling
Mhm.
art. Uh, and I'm told that there are still some small villages in the Ryukyu Islands that still do it, but I haven't seen that. In the modern day, you're much more likely to see them practicing Shima, which is also
Mhm.
known as Okinawan Sumo. They wear a gi for that, but they don't grab it. They grab the belt. It's a belt wrestling system.
Mhm.
But we also have written accounts from various martial artists of the past that make it very clear that cross training in grappling has been a standard for a very long time. So yes, we know that as a youth practice, Tegumi or Muto was super popular among Okinawan young boys and men. But even when we get into the more mature practitioners, a lot of them have sumo backgrounds, judo backgrounds, Japanese jiu-jitsu backgrounds, aikido backgrounds. And so it, to me, it stands to reason that cross training in a grappling art of some description is part of the tradition of karate.
Mhm.
And you also have to consider that if we take the fact that Okinawan martial arts were influenced by Chinese martial arts, we also know that Chinese martial arts incorporate a lot of grappling.
Mhm.
They haven't lost a lot of their applications to their forms, even if they've made them a little more sterile and showy over time. There's still
Mhm.
a lot of grappling material in their form, and so it stands to reason if Chinese forms are full of grappling and Okinawan forms are related to Chinese forms, they will also have a lot of grappling in them.
Mhm.
So we have essentially two ways that grappling is incorporated into karate, right? We have it as a cross training practice, and then we have it built into the form.
Mhm.
So it's a significant portion of the art, in my opinion. I think from a karate perspective, striking is still the primary mode of causing damage, but it is supported by grappling. And I think that when it went to mainland Japan, you have to consider the politics of that situation, right? The, there were three people really who introduced karate to mainland Japan, and only one of them really gets the credit for this.
Mhm.
Uh, so there was Toyama Kanken introduced karate to Japan. Motobu Choki introduced karate to Japan, and Funakoshi Gichin introduced karate to
Mhm.
Japan. The notable difference between those three people is that Funakoshi Gichin
Found
was
Jigaro.
fr- was friends with the founder of judo, Kano Jigoro, who was a massive figure both in the education world as a professional educator and in the martial arts world as the founder of judo. So you've got two guys from Okinawa who go to Japan and just start trying to teach martial arts on their own, and one guy who goes because he's an educator and he's well read and he has very good Japanese as opposed to speaking mostly Uchinaguchi, for example, like
Hmm.
Motobu Choki did. And he's got friends in high places. So he gets access to facilities and people that the other two didn't get access to. But we have to bear in mind that the people and facilities he got access to were judo people and judo facilities. He was sharing space in
Mm.
Kano's Kodokan and at the universities where judo was being practiced. And most of the people who picked up Shotokan, what would become Shotokan, because he didn't actually
Mm.
name it that, right?
Yeah.
Most of those people came from jujitsu and judo background. And there was also a nationalistic sense of superiority in Japan with regard to Okinawa. They considered Okinawa this backwater, island out in the middle of nowhere with these backwards people.
Mm.
And so if you consider what part of the curriculum of karate is different, if there's a lot of joint locks and chokes and throws, grappling material, well, if
Yep.
you're a superior Japanese person who has already learned jujitsu or judo, you've got all the grappling you need. Why would I need to learn any grappling from this karate guy? Just teach me how to punch people and
Mm.
kick people, right? Because that's what I don't have. That's what jujitsu is not as good at. It's hitting things. So I think that it stands to reason, and that this isn't something that's been specifically like provably written that this is why, but I think that if we can look at the scenario that karate was in, it stands to reason that if you are teaching karate to a bunch of judoka in a judo dojo, and your patron who is making sure you have your bills paid and have places to teach is a judo guy, it stands to reason you're not going to try and step on his toes by teaching stuff that's
Yeah.
too much like what he teaches, right? And you're also probably not going to do very well trying to teach what he teaches because his students already know it.
Mm.
And since you come from a background of, well, people who practice karate already cross train in grappling martial arts anyway, that's normal. I'll just teach them what they don't already do. Then that is going to lose a lot of what's in karate. All that grappling we talked about
Mm.
goes away, and you're down to punches and kicks. And the trouble with that is then if you continue teaching kata without all the grappling components, you have a lot of punches and kicks very far separated from each other with a bunch of material that no longer makes any sense.
Yeah, that's very true.
So that's my take on it. Like I said, nobody wrote down, Funakoshi doesn't teach this because Jigoro Kano would get mad. But I think it stands to reason that we can infer from the situation that he was teaching in why he might have dropped a lot of the grappling. And he didn't drop all of his grappling either. He did teach a selection of throws and joint locks we can see in his early books.
Hmm.
It's just that after he passed away, that got dropped in favor of making an even more modernized version of karate that was ideal for the athletic, competitive young man in the Japanese university system, right?
Yeah. Are we doing a full circle to saying about the sports and you know stripping everything out to make it just rule set focused? Um,
Exactly.
I remember you talking about um, your journey with a karate and an anxiety, and I've kind of a similar journey for me. Can you touch on how the karate helped you with mental health and self-image and self-worth and stuff like that?
Sure. Um, I've struggled with depression and anxiety my whole life to varying degrees, but it got really bad in junior high and high school. And I started training in karate after I graduated high school. I was fresh out of high school pretty much and decided, okay, I'm going to start doing martial arts now. And it it didn't have a huge impact at first, aside from just being an exercise format that I enjoyed. right? So I got those endorphins from getting the
Yeah.
workout in. But my first sensei, he was a teacher by trade, and he sort of snuck me in to teaching and public speaking
Mhm.
by after a while, I'd gotten comfortable with some of the material, and he'd have a brand new white belt come in, and he'd say, "Okay, Noah, can you go teach him his first four punches? That's all he needs to know, just the first four punches. You already know those. You just could go over and do that." So one on one, I'd show this new person their new punches, and then it would become, okay, I've got these two white belts. They need to learn this kick and maybe the first two moves of this kata. Go do that. And that sort of just slowly grew in the number of people and the complexity of what I had to teach them. That I went from not being able to speak in front of a group of people to leading classes. And when I say not being able to speak in front of people, uh, the best example I can give of that is in Illinois, where I grew up and where I now live again.
Mhm.
Um, in order to graduate from high school, you have to pass a couple required classes, one of which is speech, public speaking.
Mhm.
I passed that class with a D minus, which is to say that I almost did not pass that class. And the
Mhm.
only reason that I passed that class is because the teacher was also an English teacher of mine, and she gave me extra credit on my written speeches because I failed
Okay.
every speech because I couldn't actually deliver the speech in front of the class. My anxiety got so bad that I would either freeze up and not be able to speak at all, or I would only get out a mumble that nobody could hear, or I would have nervous laughing
Mm.
fits.
Sounds familiar.
So, that was the state of my ability to, speak in front of people when I got into martial arts. And that's not even getting into generally feeling like I was terrible.
Mm.
But eh, he he really gradually introduced me to that as an idea of being able to that I could speak to people, that I could do that. And by the time I was a green belt, I actually did a full half-hour presentation to an inner city grade school of 800 kids plus faculty. Um, so that was maybe a year and a half of martial arts training, and I was
Oh.
suddenly doing that. Um, so it was absolutely huge, and it was also helped, I think, by the fact that him giving me people to help showed me that he thought I was doing well,
Mm.
right? It was also, while it was a little scary that I had to teach these people stuff, it was also positive reinforcement that, well, he wouldn't have me do that if I didn't know something or other,
Yeah.
right? If I didn't know how to throw my basic four punches, he wouldn't have me teach the basic four punches to this new person, right? And it got to a point where I got fairly comfortable with the idea that, okay, I don't suck at this. I may not be great at it, but I don't
Mm.
suck at it, and that's an improvement for somebody who thinks that they're terrible,
Sure.
right? And it got to a point where it was the one thing in my life that I could reliably say I feel good about how I do
Mm.
in this activity. I feel good about myself doing this. Um, I could have fun doing other things here and there, but it wasn't that I felt like I did a good job at whatever it was. This was the only thing really that I could confidently say, yes, I feel good about myself doing this thing. And so, yeah, it was just sort of a very layered but subtle change over time. It wasn't something I noticed until I was farther along looking back at it.
It's funny how that creeps in, isn't it? It's like building confidence by stealth, by the coach, and this is what people don't realize. on both sides, kind of on a student side and a coach side, how much impact that positive attitude to students and giving them responsibility. And you can see that with children as well. Soon as you start giving responsibilities, they stepping up. And that's what I love about karate as a system and the way we teach, and that you can build that confidence in people and they not even noticing it till they don't look like green belt back. Oh shit, I just actually went through so many failures. I'm doing all right, like you said.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Um, Now you are confident. You're teaching, obviously, seminars all over the states, online. You've written a book. Am I right that you?
Uh, I have mostly written a karate book. I haven't published it yet. I need to get pictures taken and diagrams drawn and that sort of thing. Uh, and
What's the what's the timeline for that?
Oh, it's probably going to be another year or so, just because of all the different projects that I've got going on and having to set aside the time to have someone over, take all the pictures, to hire an illustrator for the diagrams, that kind of thing.
I know the
Um,
pains.
yeah, but the book is mostly written. At this point, the only additional writing that needs to happen is the captions on the photos.
Mm,
So the big hang up is getting the pictures and the diagrams done. Um, and I'm looking forward to publishing that one. Uh, it is uh, it is not so much a kata bunkai book, which I know is what I'm known for mostly at this point, but it is how to approach your karate in a practical way. Really,
hmm
it's not here's a kata and here's application, or here is this style's approach to doing this specific thing. It's more broad than that. And it is essentially informed by Okinawa-di,
hmm
Uchinadi, or Kishimoto-di, and other art with that older flavor to them, but also being willing to incorporate the new, which is what we have now started calling neoclassical
mm.
in the International Neoclassical Karate Kobudo Society. So it's been something that I've wanted to write since probably 2012, and I started writing it probably back then a couple of times and started over. But during COVID, I actually I wrote it. So I'm hoping I can get that actually all finished up with all the graphics in the
Mm.
next year or so and get that published.
So you just took us nicely to my next question about the Neoclassical Karate organization. I know you reached out to me with the creation on it. I'm sorry, I'm not the person that goes into organization, so I politely decline,
That's
but
okay.
I'm very happy to promote it because it looks like you're doing a great job. Can you promote it then? Tell us about it.
Sure. Yeah. So the INKKS, the International Neoclassical Karate Kobudo Society, is a nonprofit organization. I know that there are organizations out there that are really meant for bringing in money for the people who made it. That's not our case. We make $0. Those of us who are putting this together, this is a labor of love and a volunteer effort. So the entire board, we don't take paychecks of any kind from the INKKS. All the money that comes into it is specifically used to be able to make more content and set up events.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got different membership levels because we know not everybody's in the same place in their martial arts journey, and different people are going to want different things out of an organization, right? But we wanted to provide an organization that gave people the opportunity to learn more than just one style of karate, one approach, right? So those of us who are on the board, we all have slightly different backgrounds of Shorin-ryu Kishimoto-di or Matsumura Saito or American freestyle karate or Shotokan, all these different approaches, but we all want to make karate more in line with what it was intended to be while still incorporating modern methods. And we don't want to be exclusionary. So it's not one of those organizations where uh, if you're not doing it our way, you can't join,
Hmm.
right? I'm gonna turn you slightly so you don't have quite so much glare, but
That's
uh,
right.
the the idea is if you're not doing it in the neoclassical way but want to, we want to help you
Mm.
get there, right? So we want to create video content, create written content. We want to set up webinars and seminars. We want to set up training camps. We want to set up competitions. All these things that help people make their karate more practical and effective in the way that it was meant to be, uh, without worrying about we've got to do it only this way because we've got to preserve it, that sort of
Hmm.
thing. So we've already hosted an in-person training event that was in West Plains, Missouri back in February. We've done probably half a dozen webinars already, and we've got a bunch more scheduled for this year. We're running those completely free for our members,
Hmm.
and only $20 each for non-members. So it's pretty accessible. And our membership levels are also pretty accessible, with it being $50 for a year if you just want to be an individual member. Um, if you attend 2.5 seminars, you've more than paid for it,
Yep.
right? We are going to start planning for a gashuku, a training camp for next
Hmm.
year, that we hope to conduct over the course of something like a 3-day weekend, full 3 days of training with a variety of different instructors. So we're also building a library of kata instructional videos and videos for kata application, things like that, that'll be available to all the members for free. It's really about getting information out there and giving people training opportunities and learning opportunities, and being able to provide people best practices for if you want to make your karate practical, you should do these types of things. So we're style
Mm.
agnostic. You don't have to do this kata and this drill, but on the best practices side, you should be doing impact training. You should be hitting
Mm.
bags, you should be hitting pads, makiwara work, things like that should be somehow incorporated into what you do. You should be doing some kinds of sparring, that sort of thing.
Mm.
Not dictating how you train, but giving you tools to make your karate better and more practical.
Well, that sounds uh, interesting, and I'm sure that it's going to be successful. And seeing how many seminars you're recently putting on, there must be interest for it. And like I said, I admire your work. Um, and relation to your work and videos, you negotiating very nicely and politely your way into TikTok because there are some nut jobs there, proper nut jobs.
TikTok is an interesting space. I mean, granted, I'm in the US and um, there's a whole political debacle
Mm.
going on with TikTok. Um, but even if it does end up getting banned, it's going to be a while before that happens. And I've been enjoying my experience with TikTok, but also it's been challenging for sure. When I first got on TikTok, I wasn't doing anything martial arts related
Hmm.
because I hadn't really seen much martial arts content on TikTok, so I didn't know how it would be received. Um, and when I finally did start doing martial arts content on TikTok, uh, I I quickly became aware that there were some very particular groups on TikTok for that content. There was we just want to see a bunch of competition karate stuff and we're going
Mm.
to ooh and ah over that. And there was the karate sucks and the only thing that's good is MMA crowd. And there was very little in the way of practical or pragmatic or
Mm.
neoclassical karate on there. And eventually started seeing you on there and Brian Bates, a few other people putting out some really good content. But we are in the minority. If you search the hashtag karate, there's a ton of WKF kata demonstrations and bouncing point fighting tournaments. and very little practical karate still.
I
But
think that's because of the age. You know, there's lots of young people doing sports karate, and that's the kind of
yeah,
mainstream people coming in there.
yeah, TikTok is definitely more geared toward a younger generation. And I think that a lot of them don't really know any better when it
Mm,
comes to their karate. That's what they learned. Because, of course, sport karate like that is well suited to children.
hmm
That it's light contact or non-contact, so it's pretty safe. It's still athletic, so it keeps them in shape. It keeps them moving around. It gives them something to strive for. So I get why it's popular, right,
mm.
with the kids. But my hope is that as those kids get older, they'll start to think a little more deeply about what they can get out of their karate training than
Mm.
just the tournament.
I'm finding two sides of the TikTok. So there's a huge that I think there is bigger side of people who criticizing. But after my year of dealing with trolls, I recently don't get many of them. They stay away. I think it's just a uh, feeling that comes off my channel that don't go there because he's not gonna stop. He's gonna be keep talking back. But there's quite a few really good questions coming out from people, and it is a sparking up the thoughts about karate and how you want to explain to people who are negatively set for the content. Did you find that as well?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of criticism, and I think a lot of it comes from that second group I mentioned that
Mm,
the only good martial art is MMA, which is just a really short-sighted perspective in general. Um, because I mean, for one thing, MMA isn't a martial art unto itself,
mm,
right? But also just most martial artists who fight in MMA have some background in one particular art first, uh, and it's a silly thing to really try and argue about because there are so many different things that different people can get out of various martial arts. But it is one of those things where there's a lot of ignorance that I think can be helped. And
mm,
so if I get comments that seem to just be ignorant and not aggressively, willfully ignorant, I can try and educate on that. I can reply and try and explain why we do things a certain way, the purpose of certain things that we do, and I've had some good responses from that from people who they just didn't know any better.
mm.
Um, but there's also a lot of just trolls who, whether they know better or not, and there's also people who don't know any better and don't want to know any better
Yeah.
because they're happy with their ignorance. I have found though that that's gotten less and less in the comment section and more in the live stream. So when I go
Mm.
live on TikTok, um, oh man, is that a lot of trolls that come flooding into
I
the comments.
I can't figure out how to do every time I put the live, I don't know how to switch it off. Always got panicking, so I don't want to even do it. It's like, what did what? I can't see the buttons for it and stuff, so always got
It's
confused, so I stopped doing it.
it's a little odd, but it's a tiny little white X in the top right corner that's hard to see
Mm,
when you want to close it. But yeah, once you get the hang of it, you can set a title, you can put a comment in there that's pinned so everyone sees it first thing when they join. You can set people up as moderators so they can moderate the chat so you don't have to, um, which is helpful.
mm.
It, it makes a big difference when you don't have to constantly be blocking and muting people. But it definitely takes some getting used to. I will say that I get a lot more engagement from the TikTok lives than I ever did from going live on Facebook or Instagram.
All right.
Um, I get more views in general on my content on Facebook and Instagram than I do on TikTok. But when it comes to going live, for whatever reason, TikTok, I always get a lot more viewers and a lot more comments and engagement on TikTok than I do the other
Mm.
platforms. Um, so that was an interesting surprise as well. And I think because you can invite, other people to join your live stream, so you can be, side
Mm.
by side in video. And I think that that has a lot of potential for some really good cross training opportunities and discussion opportunities. Um, I just haven't done too much of that as of yet.
We
And
should tr
part of,
we should try some in the future.
yeah, we'll have to see if we can figure something out. Part of it is, finding people who want to do it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm up for it. I'm up for it to upset some people. I enjoying it.
Yeah, anytime you're doing something you enjoy, you're going to upset somebody for some reason.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it's never ending, but usually it's, you look on the people's profiles and either zero videos or such a terrible concepts. There's like, why you picking on me when you're doing something so terrible? It's just like
Yeah.
just picking just for sake of picking. But hey ho, yeah, it's just social media for you. Um,
Yeah.
Noah, thank you very much. Please let us know where to find you, all the TikToks, all the Instagrams, everything, so people can reach out and learn about the neoclassical way of karate.
Sure. My website is Illinois Practical Karate, which is ilpracticalkarate.com. You can find me on pretty much every social media platform by looking up Illinois Practical Karate. I did go with at Karate Illuminati on TikTok
Hmm.
for a little bit of flavor. Um, you can also find the International Neoclassical Karate Kobudo Society. We have a website, inkks.org, as well as having Facebook page and group called the International Neoclassical Karate Kobudo Society, full name. Uh, it's also on Instagram as at Neoclassical Karate and on TikTok as at inkks.info. Uh, different names are harder to get on different
Yeah.
platforms. And we do have a YouTube channel as well.
I will try to put as many links as I can find in the description and the show notes below. Thank you very much, Noah. It was a pleasure to chat to you in depth about the Kishimoto, the history, Tegumi, and all the stuff. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.